Hello, lifelong learners, beautiful souls. Welcome to today's important topic of why is it important to set boundaries. Everyone talks about setting boundaries, but I think the most common lack of clarity exists in what boundaries really are. I see a lot of misunderstandings when it comes to boundaries. So I want to begin today by sharing with you, first of all, what boundaries are not. Okay, boundaries are not walls. They are not something we build to keep people out or keep people away from us. Boundaries are bridges. They are connections that we build with people in the best way possible for both parties involved. The idea of having a proper boundary set is clear communication about what is acceptable, what is not acceptable to you, what is negotiable, what is not negotiable to you. And by you, I mean you and the other person who is involved as well. Because when it comes to boundaries, their primary function is to facilitate the progress, the growth, and the proper running of a relationship, not to break it down. Right. And I've seen there's a lot of miscommunication when it comes to boundaries where if I say this, like, you've got to be authentic, you've got to learn how to stand up for yourself. A lot of people just misunderstand that and they get aggressive with other people, saying no, this doesn't work for me. Well, that's not how boundaries are made at all. So, are you keen on learning how to set boundaries the right way and why they are important? Then you're in the right place. All right. So, speaking about boundaries in relationships, why do they matter? Look at the world. It functions essentially on mutually set boundaries that facilitate every single movement around us. Like some countries drive on the left side of the road, some countries drive on the right side of the road, and this is a legal boundary that has been set, a traffic boundary that has been set to facilitate the movement of vehicles properly without chaos, without accident. So if you see, there are boundaries in everything and everywhere. Sometimes they get the name of rules, sometimes they get the name of laws, but these are essentially boundaries at the very core function. So speaking about setting boundaries and their importance, what you need to realize is this: when you set a boundary properly, you are communicating to the other person who you truly are. What extent do they have access to you, and to what extent you would like access to them. So there is 100% clarity. There's clear communication. Whenever you have clarity in thought, in the way you want to execute your relationship, there is clear communication, and the opposite person now is not in a state of confusion. And why do I say this? I'm going to share a very personal example with you, because I am one of those people who learned how to set boundaries the hard way. So, when I was much younger, I was in a relationship with a very aggressive man. His personality was assertive with most people, but extremely aggressive when it came to women. So, initially, the abuse in my relationship with him from him was verbal in nature. After some time, the abuse started getting physical. Now I know I have been raised with a lot of love and protection. I know that I need to stand up for myself, respect myself, which means set proper boundaries saying, hey, this does not work, right? But there are a million factors that contribute to us holding ourselves back. Sometimes we are afraid to set boundaries because we feel we might lose the opposite person. Sometimes we just want to be accepted in the scenario. So we'll drop our guards and we'll just do what everybody else does. Isn't that true? Yeah, it clicks somewhere, doesn't it? Right? But then here's what happened. It took me a long time. It took me a lot of courage to find, the guts inside me to stand up to this person. But when I did, it was one of the most difficult things that I've done in my life, but one of the most rewarding things I did for myself. And here's what I want you to understand: anyone treating you anyway is entirely your responsibility. It's not a blame, it's a responsibility. And that's where boundary setting comes in. Why? Because you teach people how to treat you by the way you treat yourself with them. You teach people how to treat you by the way you treat yourself with them. Which means when I was giving in to the disrespect, when I was giving in to the abuse, when I was not being honest that this is not working for me, please treat me with respect the way I treat you. When I was not being honest, when I was not being authentic, I was disempowering me and the other person. But the moment I picked up, I took charge of my life, I took the responsibility, and I said, I want to turn things around. I don't want to give this back to you. I don't want either of us to have disrespect. And that's why that journey was a little more complicated. Why? Because it came from first not setting the right boundary and then wanting to set a new boundary. So when you're in a relationship with anybody, be it personal, be it professional, remember it's your responsibility to educate them on how you like to be treated. Because if you're going to allow disrespect, disrespect will remain. If you allow compassion and kindness, compassion and kindness will remain. So coming down to taking charge of when you're setting boundaries in relationships, what you need to realize secondly is this. Now this is the other extreme. One extreme is where we are not vocal enough, where we are not expressive enough, where we don't find the courage to stand up for who we are. The second extreme is the same thing, but when you allow the other person to take advantage of you. Meaning what? They become overly dependent on you. Their life doesn't function without you. How many people you know like that? Isn't yeah, there are a lot of people in your life that you have seen cannot function without somebody else. These are also unhealthy boundaries, by the way. Why? Because when one person in the relationship is winning or is protected or is always the one to benefit, but the other person in the relationship is suffering in some way or has to give more than they can handle, it's a lopsided relationship. It's an unfair equation. And any lopsided equation does not last for too long, it collapses. Which is why, to bring it back into balance, it is important to remember that boundary setting is the foundation. Your boundaries are your expression of self love, because you are standing up for your truth, you are standing up for your true self, and you are allowing the opposite person the opportunity to embrace you in your entire beauty and glory. Because we all have flaws, we all have quirks, we all have typical ways of doing things. Some people can find it acceptable, some may not. It's the true with our own selves, right? We find some people acceptable, some people not acceptable. And that's also another form of boundary setting. Now, when you're setting boundaries with people, what you need to remember primarily is this: they may not be ready to set a brand new boundary, especially if that relationship is old. Yeah, so it's like this. Now when with my ex abusive boyfriend, because I was a certain way for 2 years, suddenly I started standing up for myself. He was confused. He's like, this was okay till yesterday, suddenly what happened to you, Prachi? Are you following, right? So it is very important that if you're doing this after a while, okay, if you're standing up for yourself after a while in a relationship, you need to first communicate with them why you're doing what you're doing. Because there is no reason for you to threaten a perfectly good person in a perfectly beautiful relationship with you. But if you feel it is lopsided, it is off balance, that either you're taking too much or they're taking too much and it needs to come back at a level, then you need to first set the context. Set the context for communication. And before you do this, okay, before you approach them, the very first thing that you owe yourself is clarity about who you are and what you want. Because unless you're clear about what you want out of a relationship, there is no way you're going to get it. Right? Today, you might say, okay, be affectionate towards me, be loving, be supportive. Tomorrow, you might expect them to be more disciplined with you, especially if they're a parent. And then, day after tomorrow, you might end up complaining that, hey, why didn't you scold me? You saw I was doing the wrong thing. How many of you can relate to this? Yeah, isn't it? It's coming back, right? We've all done this at some point in time. So you cannot expect different things from the same person just because the times are different for you. If you communicate that clearly to them, that today I need you to be disciplined with me for this goal, and then they are ready to step up and take that responsibility, you're good. That boundary setting will work. But if you keep shifting the boundaries, if you keep them fluid, then it's going to be extremely confusing for them and not at all rewarding and even more tiresome for you. So the first responsibility you have towards yourself is to find out, who am I, what do I want from this relationship, what are my non negotiable values in this relationship. So if it's a personal relationship, this is how I want to show up. So disrespect, okay, it's very high on my list of values. I will not tolerate disrespect no matter whether the relationship is personal or professional. Right? So that's a decision you need to make for yourself. And then you show up in that power with compassion. The second thing that you do is, once you're clear about your value system, your code of honor, which is a set of non negotiable values. Then you move to level two, where you ask them, the second person, what are your expectations? What is your set of values? What do you bring to the table? What would you like me to bring to the table? Have a conversation at the same level as equals. Present it to them that I want to set a brand new code of honor with you, and that will help them and you together to reset boundaries way more smoothly than it would be the case had you not communicated clearly. So what I want you to remember is this: when it comes to boundary setting, the process is never easy. It may be a simple step by step process, finding out who I am, finding out who they are, finding out who we are together, and setting a brand new boundary system, right? But even though the process is very, very simple, emotions, feelings, your emotional state plays a very big role in how people perceive you and how you express yourself. So always do this only when you're ready to communicate without allowing any charged behavior, like emotionally charged thoughts, to come through, right? Remember, the goal of boundaries is not to throw people out of your life. It is to keep them in your life. Because if you wanted to throw them out, you could simply just stop talking to them and say, hey, you know what? This relationship is over. Yeah, but that's not the case. Boundaries are extremely critical in removing confusion, eliminating chaos, keeping the peace, keeping your communication clear, and maintaining respect and trust for both parties, which I know you also know is the foundation of any great relationship. So I hope today has been helpful. This is Prachi. I'm going to see you in the next episode. Always, always, always be phenomenal.